So Putin just shifted tactics, and it's actually pretty impressive in an evil sort of way, like what he just did. So he just came out and changed his policy again. Now, you remember after the Washington summit, Trump left the European leaders for a little bit, called Vladimir Putin, came back and said, Vladimir Putin is going to meet with Zelensky, and he doesn't need me to be there, but he's going to meet with Zelensky. And then a couple days later, they trotted out Lavrov, and Lavrov says, no, the conditions are not met for him to meet, and we have to have these conditions met. So that was a way of stalling, taking that story away, stalling longer so that, of course, these conditions will never be met. And then, okay, so now they're talking about, well, it's stalling. So what did he do now? Well, this is really interesting. Let's look at this. Putin's new narrative is suggesting that Moscow is the meeting place for himself and President Zelensky. Sure, I'm happy to meet him. Let's meet in Moscow. Of course, if you're Zelensky, the last place you want to be is meeting in Moscow. I repeat, he says, if anyone really wants to meet us, we are ready. The best place is the capital of the Russian Federation, the hero city of Moscow. Of course, you can see that that's a non-starter, but okay. Putin says, because if these agreements are reached, and let no one doubt that Russia will implement them in full, and we will respect those security guarantees that, of course, must be developed for both Russia and Ukraine. And I repeat once again, Russia will certainly implement these agreements. Anton Doroshenko said, just like it upheld the Budapest Memorandum. Like, I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. Okay. Darth Putin chimed in, you have my word, Russia won't invade Moldova. Okay, but not Georgia. Okay, but not Ukraine. But okay, but not just Crimea. Okay, but part of Donetsk. Okay, just that and all of Donetsk. Okay, just Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk, Zaporizhia. Okay, all of Ukraine. But Zelensky has my word. He'll be safe in Moscow. Yeah, you get the idea. Okay, but it's really a clever strategy for Putin to tack and say, no, we're not running from anything. We're actually trying to have peace talks, but we'll only meet here. Okay, so Kyiv Post put this out. Putin has ruled out traveling abroad for negotiations with Zelensky, mocking Ukraine's request for a neutral venue as an excessive demand. How dare he ask for so much? The Kremlin leader said he was ready to host Ukrainian president in Moscow, boasting Russia would guarantee his safety 100%. Yeah. Putin has flatly rejected holding direct talks with Zelensky in a third country, declaring the capital is the only venue. Garry Kasparov replied, laugh out loud. As I often told people who asked me if I could return to Russia, yes, but I don't take one-way trips. And then even here's Darth Putin again. Zelensky has my word. He'll be safe. Come to Moscow. He will not be safe to leave Moscow. And that's really the key. And Michael McFaul asked this, like, didn't he say something similar to Prigozhin before he made his final visit to Moscow? You have my word. Putin guarantees Zelensky's safety. Invited to Moscow for a second time. Ukraine wants a meeting. I'm ready to come, says Putin. Well, all right. I mean, it hurts my head trying to but it's really a clever tactic on Putin's part to do what he just did. Okay. Axios reports that Trump clashed with European leaders. This is a second big story, raising his voice, shifting responsibility onto Europe to pressure Putin. Okay, so EU capitals no longer expect him to impose sanctions on Russia. Trump even posted a photo with Putin from Alaska after the meeting. Okay. Trump's just not doing it. He doesn't want to do it. He's not going to do it unless there's some severe pressure causing him to do it. India confirmed it would continue buying Russian oil despite the U.S. 50% tariffs. Finance minister stressed that New Delhi must choose what suits best its economic interest, and they think that going all in with Russia is the best thing. To the point that Donald Trump just posted this, looks like we lost India and Russia to deepest, darkest China. May they have a long and prosperous future together. President Donald J. Trump. Well, Christopher Clary says, well, this will simplify any future historian's task in the who lost India debate. Yeah, it's an unforced error. It didn't need to happen. Meanwhile, Hungary's openly buying Russian oil because we have no other choice, while some European countries purchase it secretly through back channels, says simply because it's cheaper, says Foreign Minister Szijjártó. He also warned against the hypocrisy of those who loudly criticize Hungary and Slovakia, yet quietly import the same oil via Asia. So if Europeans are buying it through Asia, they need to knock that off. And Hungary and Slovakia need to knock it off too. Trump says he's very unhappy with EU countries still buying Russian energy. Hungary, which accounts for a significant portion of the EU's remaining 20% of energy purchases, is simultaneously blocking Ukraine's path to EU Union membership. And they're doing that because they want to get some kind of deal. I thought it was a financial deal. Looks like it's more to free some oligarchs. We talked about that just yesterday. At the same time, while Trump is berating the Europeans for them funding the war by buying oil from Russia, which is mostly Hungary and Slovakia, the U.S. just began importing chicken eggs from Russia for the first time in 33 years. You can't make this stuff up. Okay, talks with Trump fell flat. European leaders don't believe in new sanctions against Moscow. The negotiations were tense. Trump accused Europe of buying oil and financing the war. And Steve Witkoff was there. Ursula von der Leyen countered that imports have dropped sharply, noting that only Hungary and Slovakia still receive oil. So what was Steve Witkoff doing there? That was a good question, but Steve Witkoff piped in and said that the EU is also getting Russian fuel through India. And so that's where that India thing is. And if that's true, the EU needs to stop it. Now, Trump, after talks with Zelensky and European leaders, posted this photo with Putin and said that he wants to speak with him soon. Remember that when they were looking up at the American, I guess it was a stealth fighter going over, and Trump and Putin were looking at it? Yeah, so that's what Trump's busy doing. And again, they bought these eggs. Now, how much did they buy? Russia supplied chicken eggs to the U.S. for the first time in more than 30 years, $455,000 worth of eggs. The U.S. has faced an egg shortage and rising prices since the start of the year due to bird flu outbreaks. So this is a thing. I mean, we've joked at my house about egg prices, right? So isn't Trump, by buying these eggs or allowing this to go through, doing kind of the same thing as, and I showed this in a weird order, isn't he doing the same thing as what the Hungarians are saying they're doing? We're just buying the oil from Russia because it's cheaper. So this shouldn't be going on either. But Trump's busy doing important things like posting this about Cracker Barrel. If you don't know what Cracker Barrel is, it's a greasy spoon, deep fried Southern food in the United States. I mean, it's really tasty, but it's terrible for you. Like, it's unhealthy, but it tastes really good. And Cracker Barrel changed their logo recently to eliminate this guy that's sitting here next to the Cracker Barrel. And it was just plain color, just the words in the color. And it became a controversial thing for some reason I don't fully comprehend, but Trump was posting himself with this guy. And then Trump I haven't seen if he has actually done it yet, but Trump is supposed to be signing an executive order on Friday, that's today, to rename the Department of Defense the Department of War. Now, before you get undies in a bunch, don't worry about that. It was the Department of War until 1947, then changed to the Department of Defense. But all through World War II, it was called the Department of War, or the War Department. So, I mean, that's not really that big of a thing. It's not, I mean, I know some people will say, see, that's another sign that he's an authoritarian. Save those accusations for when you see actual authoritarian actions. Okay. After your phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky today, a reporter asked, do you plan to speak with the Russian President Putin in the near future? I will be. Yeah, I will be. We're having very good dialogue. I settled 7 wars, he says. Okay. So the U.S. is discussing now creation of a demilitarized zone between Russia and Ukraine. This area would be monitored by American satellites and drones, but ground troops would not come from NATO. Okay, so this is what's really interesting about it. American satellites, okay, that's fine. Ground troops would not come from NATO. Well, where are they going to come from? Countries like Saudi Arabia and Bangladesh are being considered instead. Why? Because Putin is vetoing troops from Europe in Ukraine. Isn't that interesting? Well, that's because he thinks that those troops from Europe and Ukraine would actually oppose him, where maybe Bangladeshi military wouldn't. I don't know. No U.S. soldiers would be deployed to Ukraine. NATO would stay out of it in order to not cross the Kremlin's red lines. A key challenge is defining what would count as a Russian violation if there was some kind of border dispute or violation, and how the response should look like. Okay. Another part of the talks concerns the Black Sea, where Turkey would be responsible for ensuring free passage. Okay, this is actually the part of it that I feel most comfortable or confident about. In the Black Sea, Turkey kind of rules the thing because it controls the Bosphorus Straits. That part's fine. It's the other part that makes me nervous. The process is overseen by the Joint Chiefs of Staff chairman, who has already presented Trump with 4 options for security arrangements, including a $100 billion package for Ukrainian arms purchases and joint development, but that's not one that he seems interested in. For now, the plan remains only on paper. Moscow has warned that the presence of any foreign troops, listen to this, the presence of any foreign troops in Ukraine would be treated as a legitimate target. Okay, I get that, but like, why do we give so much credit to Vladimir Putin here with this? I mean, why do we allow him? Okay, so he calls them legitimate targets, and here Jessica Berlin said, as long as a coalition of the willing insists that they will only act after a ceasefire, they guarantee Russia will never accept a ceasefire. Right? Don't worry about them being legitimate targets, because it would be after a ceasefire. But after a ceasefire, are they still legitimate targets? Like, is that even a thing? Okay. At any rate, Chancellor Merz is saying that we are currently unable to exert sufficient pressure on Putin to end this war. We are dependent on America to help. Like, they know that that's where they are. We see that China, India, and Brazil and other countries around the world are even openly engaging with Russia. They're no longer isolated like they were early on. So what concerns me, I will admit, also bothers me, is the fact that we as Europeans are currently not playing the role in the world that we actually want to play and that we should play in order to ensure that our interests are adequately protected. That's right. They haven't, because they've stifled their ability to do it under the American umbrella for too long. Okay. So are Trump and the U.S. serious about pushing Russia for avoiding a Ukraine ceasefire? Doesn't look that way. It doesn't look like he's serious at all. Now, this is problematic. This particular one is really deeply problematic. NBC News reports that Trump's ties with Putin complicate efforts to impose new sanctions on Russia. He has told advisors that he is determined not to damage that relationship with Putin. During his first term, Trump argued that it was in America's interest to maintain civil relations with a nuclear-armed Russia. Now, senior officials say that he's increasingly pessimistic about a quick end to the war or a personal meeting between Putin and Zelensky. Okay, so it's kind of like, I don't even know how to give the example here. So Biden was frustrating because Biden was being deterred by Putin, but Biden's not nearly as bad as Trump is. Hey, let me give you this example. So you're walking down the street and you see this big guy starting to beat on this little guy, right? And then you're like, wow, oh, what's going on? So the little guy, he starts fighting back and you're like, whoa, little guy, okay, you're fighting back. And the big guy pulls out a knife and he starts to attack him with that. Well, then you see this older gentleman, his name is Joe Biden, and he throws him a baseball bat or some kind of rod or stick that he can fight back with. But then the big guy pulls out a grenade, and there are people all around, and he says, if you do that again, I'm going to use this. And all these people, all their blood will be on your hands. And the older gentleman doesn't do anything more or feeds him stuff, but very little by little. That's what Biden did. He was deterred by Russia, right? By Putin. Trump comes along replacing Biden, and Trump just says, oh, I'm going to help break this up. I know both of them. It's okay. I have a great relationship with both of them, but then he doesn't actually do anything to break it up. Like, no, I'm not happy that the big guy keeps beating on the smaller guy. I'm not happy about that at all. And he's doing nothing. So we went from somebody backing Ukraine to somebody that's trying to be an honest broker, but not really doing anything. And it's and he's not doing it because he really likes the big guy and he wants to be, hang out and have a good time after this is all over. I think that's a fair analogy. All analogies break down at some point, but that seems pretty fair to me. Okay. Biden is a very different cat than what Trump was, and I think that that's about where we are. Okay, let's get back to the news today. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico told Zelensky that while Slovakia can't play a decisive role in Ukraine's security guarantees, he supports all initiatives that lead to ceasefire and peace. He recalled backing Zelensky's peace formula as well as other proposals and noted that Ukraine's path to the EU will be challenging, but he's offering some support. So, I mean, that's good, but I don't trust him. I just don't like the I don't trust him part. I read you the story. I don't trust him is just me commentary. Like, take that with a grain of salt. Okay. Wow. Slovakia will back the Ukraine's path to the EU. Slovakia now supports Ukraine's accession to the European Union. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced after a meeting with Prime Minister Fico. Other key points. As Prime Minister, he wants Slovakia and Ukraine to enjoy a strong, friendly relationship. But he just came from Russia, and you know he had to be having conversations with Putin and about Ukraine. So what gives? Is it just to be supportive until you're not? Or again, it's my commentary, so just take it with a grain of salt. But yeah. Okay, Russian propagandist Solyov threw a tantrum because the EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Kaya Kallas, said things that do not fit with Russian propaganda. You know, what was interesting was that Russia was addressing China, and she goes on and says, Russia and China fought the Second World War. In the Second World War, we won the Nazism. Hold on, let me see where it says. Yeah. And we won Nazism. And I was like, okay, that's something new. But then, you know, the history, you can see that they buy this narrative. So they were talking about it like, so she's talking about how the Chinese and the Russians were playing up how big and bad they were, having been the victors of World War II. Well, it's not really that simple. The victors of the World War II would have been the European allies of France and England and the United States and Canada and Australia and those kind of countries. Please forgive me if I left something out. I'm just saying the allies as opposed to the Axis. And within the Axis, Japan was attacking China, but they were attacking the nationalists who Mao drove out. So the ones that were the victors were driven out by the current Chinese government, but yet they're taking a victory lap over it as if they somehow were the ones that did it. Okay. Branislav Slanchev, he's a professor at University of California, San Diego, said, perhaps this man does not understand, because he's talking to this guy who says, Kallas does not know that China and the USSR were victorious in World War II. This moron is in charge of the EU foreign relations. and he took him to task, saying, perhaps this man does not understand what she is talking about, which is how the Russian and Chinese regimes have appropriated Allied victory over the Nazis and the Japanese to sell it as their own achievements. That's what they were doing. That's what China was doing recently. That's what the Russians were doing with their big show in May. In the CCP case, the egregiously so, but even the Russians are mostly unaware of their own collaboration with Hitler, because they talk about this, the Great Patriotic War. They don't start it with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And so they don't start there, which is where they probably should start. Their invasion of Poland, the enormous role of the U.S. Lend-Lease, you can even push it further, as Mertz did recently, to say that the commies in both countries simply replaced one form of dictatorship with another. So they didn't really liberate anyone from fascism. Or maybe and then they went on and took over a good chunk of Europe, enslaving under this form of communist fascism. If I could say communist fascism, I know it's not a proper thing. Communist totalitarianism. Or maybe he doesn't understand. After all, he's a lecturer in political science and history per his bio, in which case he's just peddling lies and distortions in service of the Kremlin and Beijing. I would worry about what he teaches his students, this guy here that was saying this. He's a lecturer in political science at University Catholic. I don't know what that is. Okay. The last video that I put out was this about I cataloged 7 days of Russia's economic meltdown It really was a bad week economically, and you go back and you watch that, and then, there's things that just came out even today. In Kamchatka, a passenger plane engine failed right in the sky, and an AN-26 flying was forced to turn around and land at the nearest airport. There were 30 passengers on board. It seems like, and the commentary here is not a single day without an incident in Russian aviation. I think that might be a little bit hyperbolic. I'm sure someday has gone by without it, but they aren't able to maintain and replace parts and things along those lines like they need to. And then I saw this. If you thought Russia had already had the world's worst roads, it's only getting started. So here's the Moscow Times showing that Russia cuts road repairs by a quarter to save money for war. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, got to do it somehow. And then this commentary again by the same professor I just highlighted. It hit me like a 2x4. That's right. This is exactly what has happened in the economy or international relations. The chart with the trade profiles of Russia and China could be straight out of a dependency theory textbook. Raw resources flowing one way, manufactured goods flowing the other way. Well, what exactly is going on here? Well, this is mercantilism. I mean, this is like what the British and the Americans did while the Americans were colonies. And congratulations, you've rediscovered the metropole colony trade structure. Except this time, the empire's capital is Beijing, and the colony still thinks it's a great power. That's right. So it's like economically, the Chinese have just colonized Russia. Russia's going to be happy to send all these raw goods, and China will be sending stuff back. And that's how it's going to be working. Okay. So at any rate, with everything that we've been talking about with Trump, it should be easy to park. And I'm showing you this video of this tiny little car trying to park. And it should be easy to land this thing, to say, okay, well, I promised sanctions. Here are the sanctions I'm going to impose. And he just can't seem to bring himself to do it. He just can't seem to get it done right. So he's going to say, okay, another 2 weeks. 2 weeks from now, we'll do this kind of, like he didn't say 2 weeks this last time, but he can't bring himself to actually do this thing to Putin, because Putin, yeah. So that's where we are. All right. Thank you, my friends, for your time. Thank you for the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.